Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to a warm summer evening in 1853 to a lakeside restaurant in New York to witness the wonderfully petty, beautifully grumpy origin story of the world's favorite crunchy snack. You are sitting at a small, elegantly set table on the veranda of Moon's Lake House, a renowned and fashionable establishment in Saratoga Springs. The air is thick and sweet with the smell of pine needles and damp earth from the surrounding woods, mingled with the expensive perfumes of the other patrons and the faint, tantalizing aroma of roasting meats drifting from the kitchens. Before you, Saratoga Lake is a sheet of dark, shimmering glass, reflecting a sky full of stars and a sliver of a crescent moon. It's an almost perfect picture of Gilded Age tranquility. Honestly, given the era's complete lack of bug spray and the ever-present threat of mosquito-borne everything, it's a minor miracle you're not swatting at your ankles every 2 seconds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I invite you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're tuning in from and what time of day it is for you. It's always warming to know how vast our community of nocturnal historians reaches. Now, let the soft lapping of the lake water lull you deeper into the scene. You adjust yourself slightly in your chair. The wood is sturdy, a little stiff. You smooth the front of your waistcoat, perhaps the fine silk of your dress, and glance around. The veranda is lit by the gentle, flickering glow of several large gas lamps, casting long, dancing shadows. Their light catches the sparkle of crystal glassware and the polished sheen of heavy silver cutlery. The sound is a gentle murmur, the low thrum of conversation from other tables, the clink of a fork against a porcelain plate, the rustle of a starched linen napkin. This is the place to be for New York's elite when they escape the city heat. Vanderbilts, politicians, financiers, they all flock here. You are one of them, a person of taste and, more importantly, a person of habit. You come to Moon's Lake House for the clean air, the prestigious company, and for one specific thing on the menu. The waiter approaches, silent and efficient on his feet. He's a professional, his face a perfect mask of polite neutrality. He hands you a large, ornate menu, the script, a flourish of calligraphy. But you don't really need to look at it. You already know what you want. Your eyes, however, scan the page out of habit, taking in the offerings. Roasted duck, venison, fresh trout from the lake, and a baffling array of side dishes. A typical fine dining experience in this era wasn't a simple 3-course affair. Historians document meals that could stretch to a dozen courses or more, a marathon of consumption designed to display wealth. It's exhausting just to think about. You see an entire section devoted to potatoes, prepared in every manner conceivable: boiled, mashed, pan-fried, baked. The humble potato, originally from the Andes, has thoroughly conquered the European palate and, by extension, the American one. But you're here for a very particular style, a specialty of the house, prepared by the famously talented and equally famously temperamental chef, George Crum. The dish is known simply as French fried potatoes, and at Moon's Lake House, they are the gold standard. They are cut thick, fried to a golden brown perfection, soft and fluffy on the inside, with just the right amount of crispness on the outside. They are, in your considered opinion, the pinnacle of the potato arts. Many historical accounts of the period mention these specific fried potatoes, cementing their status as a local legend long before the incident that would make them immortal. "The usual, sir?" the waiter asks, his voice low and respectful. You nod, a small, confident gesture. "And please, ensure they are cooked properly tonight. The last time, they were a touch softer than I prefer." It's a mild, almost offhand comment, the kind a regular patron feels entitled to make. You are not trying to cause a scene. You simply have standards. The waiter gives a short, almost imperceptible bow. "Of course, sir. The chef will be so informed." He glides away, your order committed to memory, leaving you once again to the peaceful ambience of the lake at night. You lean back, taking a slow sip of water from your glass. The air is cooling now as the evening deepens. You feel a sense of pleasant anticipation, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that soon the perfect plate of fried potatoes will arrive. There is no reason to think tonight will be any different from a dozen other nights at this fine establishment. No reason at all. Accounts differ on just how wealthy or influential our diner for the evening truly was, but they all agree on one thing. They were exceptionally particular. You are that diner, and your quiet request for a bit more crispiness has just been sent, like a tiny, unassuming messenger, into the hot, fiery, and notoriously ill-tempered heart of the kitchen. As the waiter vanishes back toward the bright, noisy rectangle of the kitchen door, your attention drifts from the serene lake to the wider world it belongs to. You are in Saratoga Springs, New York, a town that in 1853 is the absolute epicenter of American high society's summer migration. It's less a town and more a beautifully constructed stage for the performance of wealth and leisure. The very air you're breathing feels expensive, a blend of Adirondack nature and New York City money. The fundamental reason for this town's existence, the engine that powers all this glamour, is something bubbling deep in the earth: mineral water. This is a spa town, a place built on the promise of health and rejuvenation. For decades, people have journeyed here to take the waters, a ritualistic part of the summer for the affluent. They believe the naturally carbonated springs, rich in minerals like magnesium, iron, and iodine, can cure everything from indigestion to rheumatism to melancholy. From your perch at Moon's Lake House, you can almost feel the pulse of the town itself, a gentle thrum of activity that lies just beyond the dark fringe of trees. Earlier today, you likely took a promenade along Broadway, the town's main thoroughfare. You would have passed the grand, sprawling hotels like the United States Hotel and the Union Hall, with their massive columned porches crowded with people rocking in chairs, fanning themselves, and observing the endless parade of arrivals and departures. This is the primary activity in Saratoga: seeing and being seen. Carriages, gleaming and polished, pulled by immaculate horses, ferry visitors from the train station to their opulent summer cottages, a term of comical understatement for what are, in reality, enormous mansions. The air would have been filled with the clip-clop of hooves, the gentle rumble of iron-rimmed wheels on packed dirt roads, and a constant, low buzz of high society gossip. Historians still debate how much genuine healing happened here. Was it the water, with its distinctively sulfuric and frankly rather unpleasant taste? Or was it the powerful placebo effect of a meticulously structured vacation? You can picture the morning ritual. Patrons would stroll to the various springs: High Rock, Congress, MP Reach, with its own purported unique mineral profile. Here, dipper boys would use long ladles to serve up the bubbly, earthy-tasting water. The idea of starting your day with a cup of what tastes like liquid rocks to cure your gout is a bit baffling now, but it was the height of medical sophistication then. It was less about pleasantry and more about virtuous suffering for the sake of wellness. The very fact that the water tasted slightly strange was proof that it must be working. You probably did this yourself this morning, holding a small tin cup, nodding politely to acquaintances, all of you pretending to enjoy the potent, eggy brew that promised vitality. The pursuit of health was, of course, a convenient excuse for the real business of Saratoga: social networking, matchmaking, and conspicuous consumption. The fashion alone is a testament to this. The men in their tailored suits, the women in voluminous dresses with layers upon layers of petticoats, requiring a team of engineers just to get through a doorway. You remember the rustle of silk and taffeta, the strict corsetry that enforced a posture of perpetual dignity. It's a world away from the casual comfort we take for granted. Trying to enjoy a leisurely stroll in that kind of get-up, especially in the humid heat of a New York July, must have been its own form of endurance sport. The entire experience of Saratoga Springs is built on a foundation of exacting standards. Everything had to be just so: the cut of your suit, the angle of your hat, the pedigree of your horse, and naturally, the preparation of your dinner. It's this culture of precise, uncompromising expectation that you've brought with you to your table tonight. When you sent back a plate of potatoes, It wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of conformity. You are simply playing your part in a society where demanding perfection is not just accepted but expected. It is a sign that you belong here, among the people who understand the difference between good and truly excellent. The chef, George Crum, is also a part of this world. His reputation as a culinary genius is what allows him to work at a place like Moon's Lake House. But that reputation also depends on his ability to meet the relentlessly high standards of patrons like you. Your request wasn't an insult to be ignored. It was a challenge to be met. You take another sip of water plain, clear water, thankfully not from one of the town's famous springs. The stars overhead seem to have multiplied, and the moon has climbed a little higher. The gentle murmur of conversation on the veranda continues, a soothing, rhythmic backdrop to your thoughts. You are utterly relaxed, nestled in the very heart of the Gilded Age's favorite playground. A place built on bubbling water, impossible dresses, and the quiet, unwavering conviction that if you pay enough, everything can be, and should be, perfect. You are still waiting for your potatoes, confident that this time they will meet your very specific, very Saratogan standards. Now, let's leave your comfortable seat on the veranda and push through the swinging door into the world from which your French fried potatoes are meant to emerge. The moment you cross the threshold, the entire sensory landscape shifts. The gentle, cool lakeside air is blasted away, replaced by a wave of intense, humid heat. You are now in the kitchen of Moon's Lake House, a realm of fire, iron, and organized chaos. It's loud, so loud. The polite murmurs of the dining room are swallowed by a symphony of clanging pots, hissing fryers, the sharp chop 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 of knives on thick wooden blocks, and the constant shouting of orders. 2 ducks for table 7. Yes, chef. Where is the trout for the congressman? Coming, chef. It is a pressure cooker, both literally and figuratively. In the center of this culinary tempest stands the chef himself, George Crum, and he is everything the rumors suggest. He is a commanding presence, not necessarily because of his size, but because of the sheer force of his personality, which seems to radiate heat just as intensely as the massive cast iron stove he presides over. His face, illuminated by the firelight, is slick with sweat, his brow furrowed in concentration. He moves with a purpose and economy of motion that tells you he is a master of this domain. His hands, which can coax delicate flavors from the simplest ingredients, are strong and sure. Nothing happens in this kitchen without his approval. He is the conductor of this clattering, chaotic orchestra. Your waiter navigates the crowded space and approaches the chef with a careful deference. Chef, table 12 sends its compliments. He begins, a standard diplomatic opening. But Crum cuts him off with a sharp glance, not even pausing in his work of searing a thick cut of venison. Out with it, man. What is it? The waiter clears his throat, his professional composure faltering just a bit in the face of this culinary titan. The gentleman finds the potatoes not crisp enough. He requests another order. For a moment, there is a dangerous stillness around Crum. The sizzling of the venison seems to grow louder in the brief silence. Crum slowly turns his head, his dark eyes fixing on the waiter. His expression is one of pure, distilled indignation. A slight has been made. A judgment has been passed on his craft. Historians widely acknowledge George Crum's heritage was a point of interest and, sadly, prejudice at the time. He was of mixed African American and Native American descent, a member of the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. In the deeply stratified and racially segregated society of 19th century America, for a man of his background to rise to the position of a celebrated chef in a premier white establishment was a monumental achievement. It speaks to a talent so undeniable that it transcended the profound racial barriers of the era. But it also meant he likely had to be twice as good, work twice as hard, and tolerate no disrespect to prove his worth every single day. One fringe, and probably apocryphal tale, suggests his original family name was Speck, and he adopted Crum because he felt it sounded more substantial, more like a proper chef. So when you, a privileged patron on the other side of that door, sent back your potatoes, you weren't just criticizing a dish. You were, however, unintentionally, prodding a lifetime of professional pride, a pride forged in a society that was reluctant to grant him respect in the first place. Crum's temper was legendary. Regulars at the restaurant knew of it, other staff feared it, but it was largely seen as a byproduct of his genius, the kind of artistic temperament that was tolerated, even romanticized, in great talents. They didn't see the complex social and racial pressures simmering beneath that temper. They just saw a grumpy chef. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that he made the best French fried potatoes in the state of New York. The suggestion that they were anything less than perfect was not just a complaint, it was a personal affront. He snatches the plate of rejected potatoes from the waiter's hand. He stares at them, these perfectly good, thick-cut, golden brown spears of fried potato. To him, they are a monument to his skill. To the diner out there on the cool veranda, they are a minor failure. Not crisp enough? He mutters, his voice a low growl that cuts through the kitchen noise. Other kitchen staff discreetly find tasks to do on the other side of the room. They know this look. This is the start of a storm. The gentleman wants crisp. I'll give him crisp. I'll give him something so crisp he won't be able to get his fork into it. The waiter, seeing his duty is done and eager to escape the blast radius, nods quickly and backs away, melting back into the chaos. George Crum is left alone, holding the offending plate. A glint appears in his eye knot of malice, precisely, but of a specific, creative, and profoundly sarcastic kind of vengeance. The seed of an idea has been planted, watered by indignation, and fertilized by a flash of grumpy genius. Your simple, quiet complaint has reached its destination, and the reaction is about to be far, far more significant than you could ever imagine. The swinging door from the kitchen stills, and a moment later, your waiter glides back into the calm of the veranda, a vision of professional poise. In his hands, he carries a single, gleaming white porcelain plate. On it sits a generous pile of what you've been waiting for, Moon's Lake House French, fried potatoes. They look, to the casual eye, absolutely perfect. They are thick-cut, like miniature golden ingots, steam rising from them in a gentle, hazy cloud that carries the clean, comforting scent of hot oil and perfectly cooked potato. They are dusted with just the right amount of coarse salt, which sparkles under the gaslight. A small sprig of parsley, a fashionable garnish of the day, is tucked jauntily to one side. The presentation is simple, elegant, and precisely what you expected. The waiter places the plate before you with a quiet, reverent motion. "Your French fried potatoes, sir," he murmurs, his job complete. He lingers for a second, a silent sentinel waiting for your nod of approval, before receding back into the shadows to attend to another table. You are alone now, with your potatoes. You pick up your heavy silver fork, its tines cool against your fingertips. You admire the plate for another moment. They truly are a beautiful sight. But beauty isn't the only standard by which they will be judged tonight. The true test is in the texture. You nudge one of the potatoes with the tip of your fork. It yields a little too easily. You press down, and the fork sinks into a soft, fluffy interior, with only the slightest hint of a crust giving way. You spear the piece and lift it. It's heavy, substantial. You take a bite. The flavor is wonderful rich, earthy, perfectly seasoned. The inside is like a cloud of perfectly cooked potato, light and creamy, but the outside is lacking. There is a crispness, yes, but it's a polite, yielding crispness. A first impression crispness that immediately gives way to softness. It is not the definitive, assertive, crackling crispness that you, a connoisseur of the fried potato, have come to expect and demand from this establishment. They are, in a word, limp. Not terribly so, but enough for you to notice. They seem to be crying out, in a quiet, starchy voice, for a slightly longer, more aggressive bath in the hot oil. Legend has long insisted that the diner on this fateful evening, the person whose exacting standards you currently embody, was none other than the railroad and shipping magnate, Cornelius Vanderbilt himself. Most modern historians now view this as a flavorful embellishment, a bit of celebrity sparkle added to the story over the years to make it more compelling. It probably wasn't him, but it was someone like him. Someone with the means, the confidence, and the practiced fastidiousness to believe that their personal preference was an objective standard that the world should meet. Someone who wouldn't just think, "Oh well, these are a bit soft, but still tasty." No, you are a person who thinks, "This is incorrect, and it must be rectified." This kind of specific complaint was part of the dining experience of the wealthy. The very way food was cut was a status symbol. Delicate, thin, precise cuts were associated with aristocratic French cuisine, while thicker, heartier, more rustic preparations were often seen as being for the lower classes. Historians who study the food of the period note that to be a person of high standing was to have a highly refined palate, one that could detect and critique the subtlest of variations. Your critique of these potatoes wasn't just about taste, it was about upholding a certain social and aesthetic order. These fries were, perhaps, a bit too democratic for your liking. You sigh, a small, quiet sound of disappointment. You eat another one, just to be sure. No, you were right the first time. The potential is there, but the execution is flawed. This will not do. The decision forms in your mind, and once it's there, it feels less like a choice and more like a simple necessity. You place your fork down gently beside the plate. This whole internal drama is likely the most stressful event of your otherwise peaceful evening. You catch the waiter's eye with a slight lift of your chin. He immediately understands the summons and glides back to your table, his face a perfect mask of polite inquiry, a skill likely taught on day one of Gilded Age waiter school. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" he asks. You offer him a thin, apologetic smile. "My compliments to the chef on the flavor." You begin, softening the blow. "However, I'm afraid these are a touch too soft for my liking. They lack the crispness I so enjoy. Would it be too much trouble to ask for another batch, fried a little longer this time?" The request is delivered in a calm, reasonable tone. You are not angry. You are simply correcting a small error. The waiter doesn't blink. He has likely fielded this exact type of feedback countless times. "It is no trouble at all, sir." He carefully lifts the plate, with its pile of mostly untouched and, by any reasonable standard, delicious potatoes, and turns to carry it back to the swinging doors of the kitchen. You lean back in your chair, relieved. The situation is being handled. You take a sip of water and gaze out at the lake, completely oblivious to the fact that you have just returned a perfectly lovely plate of food to a notoriously short-tempered genius. You have just lit a fuse. The waiter pushes back through the kitchen door, this time with a bit more apprehension. The blast of heat and noise greets him again, but now it feels charged with a specific tension. He makes his way to the chef's station, where George Crum is plating a trout with the intense focus of a surgeon. The waiter stands silently for a moment, holding the rejected plate of potatoes. He's like a messenger in a throne room, bearing bad news and hoping not to get symbolically beheaded. Crum senses his presence without looking up. "What is it now?" he asks, his voice dangerously low. The waiter takes a shallow breath. "The gentleman at table 12, chef." He returned the second plate. Crum stops. His hand, holding a delicate pair of tongs, hovers over the trout. He slowly lifts his head, and his eyes, which were moments before focused on the artistic placement of a lemon wedge, are now burning coals of disbelief. He looks at the plate in the waiter's hand. He sees the thick-cut golden brown potatoes, almost all of them still there, rejected, twice. "Returned it?" he says, his voice a quiet rumble. What was the complaint this time? The waiter swallows, keeping his voice as neutral and robotic as possible. "Still not crisp enough, chef. He says they are too thick, too soft. He wants them crispier. Too thick, too soft." The words hang in the hot, greasy air. In Crum's mind, he is hearing a direct assault on the very foundation of his craft. He made them exactly as a French fried potato should be made. He even gave the first batch an extra minute in the oil. The complaint is no longer just feedback. It's an absurdity. It's like telling a master painter that his sky is not blue enough, or a composer that his symphony needs more notes. To George Crum, on this particular evening, under the immense pressure of a high-season Saturday night, this critique feels like the petulant whining of an ignorant fool who wouldn't know a properly cooked potato if it sat down and introduced itself. a simmering rage begins to boil inside him. The academic world still lightly debates the precise psychology of Crum at this moment. Was it pure, unadulterated anger, or was there a flash of a darker, more sarcastic humor at play? Most accounts lean toward a potent cocktail of both. He was insulted, yes, but he was also a showman. He wasn't just going to get angry, he was going to make a point. A theatrical, malicious, and delicious point. He glances at the bin of potatoes, then at the razor-sharp mandolin slicer nearby, an instrument used for creating perfectly uniform, thin slices of vegetables. An idea, born of pure, weaponized sarcasm, sparks in his brain. It's a beautifully petty and glorious plan for revenge. Not crisp enough, he repeats, but this time, there's a different tone to his voice. The anger is still there, but it's now mixed with a strange, almost joyful malevolence. He wants crisp. He wants thin. Oh, I'll give him crisp. I'll give him potatoes, so crispy he'll think they're made of glass. I'll give him something he can't possibly eat with a fork. A slow, wicked grin spreads across his face. The other cooks in the kitchen see this and instinctively know that something extraordinary is about to happen. This isn't just an angry chef throwing a tantrum. This is an artist about to create a masterpiece of spite. One amusing but unverified historical tidbit claims that Crum was also dealing with a toothache that day, making his already thin patience virtually non-existent. Imagining him creating this iconic food while nursing a throbbing molar adds another layer of wonderful misery to the tale. It's probably not true, but it's a fun detail to chew on. He grabs the waiter's arm, not with violence, but with a fierce intensity. "Tell the gentleman," Crum says, his eyes gleaming with a mad sort of creative fire, "that the chef is personally preparing a special batch just for him. Tell him it will be worth the wait." He dismisses the waiter and turns back to his station with a newfound energy. The other orders, the other patrons, the ticking clock of the dinner rush, it all fades into the background. He now has a singular mission, a holy quest. He is going to create a dish not to please, but to mock. He will follow the diner's ridiculous instructions to their most absurdly literal conclusion. He is going to wage a small, private war, and his weapons will be a potato, a slicer, and a vat of very hot oil. He picks up a fresh, firm potato, its skin still flecked with cool, dark earth. It is an object of infinite potential. In the hands of another chef, it might become a comforting mash or a hearty stew. In the hands of George Crum at this very moment, it is destined to become a vehicle for magnificent, history-making scorn. He walks over to the slicer, his heart pounding with the thrill of delicious, salty revenge. The grand experiment is about to begin. George Crum stands before his workstation, the potato held firm in his hand like a small, starchy grenade. The righteous fury of a slighted artist courses through him. This is no longer about cooking, it's about communication. He's going to send a message back to that pampered diner on the veranda, and it's going to be a salty, crunchy one. He sets his jaw, a muscle twitching in his cheek. His movements are now filled with a sharp, almost aggressive precision. He abandons his knives. For the task at hand, for the level of sarcastic thinness he plans to achieve, a simple blade will not do. He needs a more radical tool. He reaches for his mandolin slicer. The mandolin, in 1853, wasn't the safety-conscious, plastic-guarded device you might find in a modern kitchen. It was a simpler, more fearsome-looking implement, a flat wooden board with an incredibly sharp, angled steel blade set into it. It was a device that demanded respect and promised both perfect, paper-thin vegetable slices and, with a moment's inattention, the removal of one's fingertips. To Crum, right now, it is the perfect instrument for his malicious masterpiece. He doesn't want to merely slice the potato. He wants to obliterate its very structure, to transform it from a substantial tuber into something ethereal and brittle. He takes the first potato and, with a series of quick, angry, yet expertly controlled strokes, he shaves it against the blade. Swish, swish, swish. The sound is sharp, decisive. Instead of thick, blocky fries, what falls onto the wooden board below are delicate, translucent, almost lace-like discs of potato. They are so thin you can practically see the grain of the wood right through them. He holds one up to the firelight. It's a pale, fragile wafer, impossibly thin, a mocking caricature of a slice of potato. A quiet, satisfied grunt escapes his lips. This is a good start. This is the very definition of not thick. He works with a feverish intensity, shaving one potato after another until he has a small mountain of these paper-thin, ghostly discs. The other cooks watch him, mesmerized by this strange, angry ritual. They have never seen potatoes treated with such beautiful contempt. This wasn't part of any recipe in any French cookbook. This was something new, something being willed into existence right now through sheer, concentrated spite. Crum, however, isn't finished. His plan has another, equally important stage. Simply frying these would not be enough. He needs to push the boundaries of crispiness to their absolute breaking point. Next, the salt. He grabs a handful of coarse salt, far more than he would normally use for a single order of potatoes, and showers it over the pile of thin slices. It's a deliberately aggressive seasoning. This isn't meant to enhance the flavor. It's meant to be an assault, a salty punishment for the crime of being a picky eater. He tosses them, ensuring every single fragile slice is coated in the abrasive crystals. This act serves a dual purpose, one of which Crum may have understood intuitively as a master of cooking. The salt would begin to draw out excess moisture from the potato slices, a process known to chemists as osmosis. This accidental bit of food science was a critical, if unintentional, step. A drier potato would fry up far crispier than a moist one. He then turns to his fry kettle, a massive cast iron cauldron filled with bubbling, shimmering lard, heated to a terrifyingly high temperature. This wasn't the clean, refined vegetable oil of today. Historians of food point out that most 19th century frying was done in animal fats like lard or beef tallow, giving the finished product a richer, deeper flavor. He scoops up the mountain of thin salted potato wafers in his hands. He walks to the cauldron, and with a grand, theatrical gesture of finality, he dumps the entire lot into the seething hot fat. The kettle erupts with a furious hiss and a violent bubbling, a testament to the moisture being flash-boiled out of the delicate slices. It's a sound of violent transformation. He has sentenced these potatoes to death by deep frying, and he's going to make sure the sentence is carried out to its most extreme conclusion. He doesn't just want them golden brown. He wants them fried to within an inch of their life, until they are brittle, browned, and utterly transformed. He watches them dance and skitter in the roiling fat, a devilish satisfaction on his face. This, he thinks, is a dish that a man cannot possibly eat with a fork. This is a dish that will shatter at the slightest touch. This is a dish that says, "You wanted crisp? Here, choke on it." Back on the veranda, you remain in a state of blissful ignorance. The night has deepened, the air carrying a gentle chill that makes the soft glow of the gas lamps feel even more welcoming. You've been waiting for what feels like a considerable amount of time, long enough to make you wonder if perhaps you offended the chef after all. You watch another party arrive, their laughter and excited chatter briefly breaking the evening's calm. You tap your fingers lightly on the starched white tablecloth, a quiet rhythm of impatience. Was it really so difficult to fry a potato properly? Perhaps you'll just have the waiter cancel the order and bring the bill. Just as this thought crosses your mind, the swinging door to the kitchen opens and your waiter emerges one final time. He moves toward your table with his usual graceful stride, but you notice something different in his demeanor. There's a faint, almost imperceptible air of anticipation about him, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes that his professional training can't quite conceal. He is carrying another plate, but what's on it doesn't look like anything you've seen before. It is not a neat, orderly pile of thick-cut French fries. Instead, it's a chaotic, golden brown heap of something else. It's a mound of delicate, curled, impossibly thin and glistening objects that catch the lamplight in 1,000 different ways. The waiter places the plate before you. "From the chef, sir," he says, his voice perfectly level, but with a subtext that seems to say, "Here you go. You asked for this." He calls them Saratoga chips. You stare at the plate. It looks like a pile of withered, fried autumn leaves. The individual pieces are translucent, browned to a deep, almost dangerous-looking color at the edges, and they are piled in a tangled, delicate nest. You can't discern a single, uniform shape. They look wrong. They look like a culinary mistake, a joke. Your fork, sitting primly beside the plate, suddenly looks absurdly large and clumsy, utterly unsuited for the task of tackling this brittle mound. This, you realize, with a dawning sense of mingled annoyance and fascination, is the chef's response. It's a sarcastic, passive-aggressive masterpiece. He has taken your request for thinner and crispier to its most literal, most ridiculous extreme. You feel a flush of indignation. He's mocking you. The waiter is still standing there, a silent witness to this culinary showdown. All eyes, it seems, the other diners, who may be casting curious glances, maybe even the ghost of Cornelius Vanderbilt upon you. You are expected to react. A protest seems in order. A stern word for the manager, perhaps. But then, curiosity gets the better of you. And perhaps a bit of theatricality yourself. You're a person of the world, after all. You can appreciate a well-executed bit of insolence. Instead of calling for the manager, you decide to play along, to call the chef's bluff. You will attempt to eat his little joke. Realizing your fork is useless, you reach out with your fingers, an act that in this formal setting feels slightly scandalous. You gingerly pick up one of the warm, delicate things. It is light as air and feels fragile, almost like a piece of parchment. It has a slight oily sheen, and tiny crystals of salt glitter on its surface. There is a specific type of delight that comes from eating with your hands in a place where you're absolutely not supposed to. One obscure account even suggests you muttered something like, "Well, let's see what the artist has wrought," under your breath. You bring the chip to your mouth and take a bite. And then everything changes. A sound erupts in your head, a sound you have never before associated with a potato. It's a loud, satisfying, explosive crunch. It's a shattering sound, a glorious crackle that echoes in your ears. It is the very essence of crisp, distilled into its purest form. And then comes the flavor. An intense, immediate wave of saltiness hits your tongue, followed instantly by the rich, nutty, concentrated flavor of a potato that has been fried to utter perfection. It's not the soft, fluffy interior of a French fry. It's a completely different experience. It's savory, intense, and utterly, addictively delicious. Your eyes widen in surprise. This isn't a punishment. This is a revelation. You quickly reach for another one, then another. The initial crunch, followed by the rapid dissolve of the delicate wafer on your tongue, is a completely novel and deeply pleasurable sensation. You're not just eating, you're experiencing a symphony of texture and sound. The waiter, who had been expecting a complaint, watches in stunned silence as you begin to devour the entire plate with a visible, unrestrained delight. The grumpy chef's meticulously crafted insult, his salty revenge, has backfired in the most spectacular way possible. He intended to create a dish that was inedible. He accidentally created a dish that was irresistible. In the quiet elegance of Moon's Lake House, a legend has just been born, not with a whimper, but with a magnificent, resounding crunch. Your enthusiastic crunching does not go unnoticed. The waiter, a man trained to observe the subtle cues of diners, is the first to register the dramatic shift in the evening's narrative. He sees your initial look of bewilderment transform into one of genuine, unrestrained delight. He watches as you, a paragon of Gilded Age decorum, abandon your fork and happily, almost greedily, work your way through the entire pile of golden brown chips. This was not in the script he had anticipated. He expected a summons, a complaint, perhaps even a demand to see the manager. Instead, he is witnessing the birth of a culinary obsession. After a few minutes, having polished off nearly the entire plate, you look up at the waiter, a broad, sincere smile on your face. "My compliments to the chef," you declare, your voice full of genuine admiration. "These are magnificent, truly magnificent. Please, Bring me another order immediately." And with that, you turn back to the few remaining chips, savoring the last crunchy morsels. The waiter is momentarily speechless. He simply nods, a flicker of awe in his expression, and turns on his heel. He pushes back through the swinging kitchen door, this time not as a nervous messenger of complaints, but as the bearer of astonishing news. He finds George Crum standing with his arms crossed, leaning against a work table, waiting for the inevitable angry feedback. The other kitchen staff are stealing glances at him, waiting for the final act of the drama. "Well?" Crum grunts, seeing the waiter return. "Did he storm out? Is he demanding my head on a platter?" The waiter shakes his head, a slow smile spreading across his own face. "No, chef," he says, his voice full of wonder. "He loves them. He says they are magnificent. He wants another order." Crum stares at the waiter, his grumpy, self-satisfied smirk faltering into a look of pure confusion. What? The news ripples through the hot, noisy kitchen. The other cooks stop what they are doing. A dish a few feet away is forgotten and sizzles a little too long on the griddle. The man who had set out to create a dish of pure mockery had instead created a hit. His failure was a resounding success. The second order is made, this time with a sense of bewilderment rather than rage, and sent out to your table. Meanwhile, the story begins to travel. The diners at the adjacent table, who had been discreetly watching the entire potato saga unfold, become curious. "Pardon me." One of them leans over and asks you, "What are those you are eating? They look extraordinary." You, now the proud discoverer of this new delicacy, are more than happy to share your newfound knowledge. "They're called Saratoga chips," you say with authority. "You simply must try them." And so they do. They flag down the waiter and order a plate for their own table. Their reaction is the same: initial curiosity, followed by an audible crunch, and then sheer delight. The news spreads across the veranda like wildfire. Table by table, patrons begin to abandon their traditional orders and demand a plate of the mysterious, crunchy Saratoga chips. It becomes an evening of shared discovery. The gentle murmur of the veranda is now punctuated by a cascade of crunches, a sound that would soon become synonymous with snacking worldwide. What started as a private war between a chef and a diner has turned into a public phenomenon. Moon's Lake House had a new star on its menu. From that night on, the Saratoga chips were no longer a joke. They were the main attraction. Word spread throughout the exclusive circles of Saratoga Springs. People came to the restaurant, not for the duck or the venison, but specifically to try the famous crispy potatoes that Chef Crum had invented out of sheer pique. Historians confirm that the chips quickly became an integral part of the Moon's Lake House experience. They were served in paper cones to diners, becoming the must-have specialty that everyone talked about. A visit to Saratoga Springs in the years that followed was incomplete without a trip to Moon's to try the chips. It's a perfect example of accidental innovation, where the intended outcome, annoyance, was a complete failure, but the unintended consequence, deliciousness, was a triumph. George Crum, the famously temperamental chef, had stumbled into immortality. His fit of creative anger had produced not just a novelty dish, but an entirely new category of food. He likely went home that night exhausted and confused, a man who had tried to land a punch and instead received a standing ovation. His punishment potatoes became his signature dish, the foundation of his future fame and fortune. On that cool summer evening, by the placid waters of Saratoga Lake, a grumpy chef and a picky diner accidentally conspired to change the world of food forever, one satisfyingly crunchy, salty, and glorious chip at a time. The battle was over, and somehow everyone had won. The story of you, the picky diner, and George Crum, the grumpy chef, is a wonderfully simple and satisfying one. It's a perfect little narrative loop. A complaint is made, revenge is plotted, the revenge backfires spectacularly, and a beloved snack is born. It has all the elements of a great folktale, which is why it has been told and retold for over a century and a half. However, as with so many seemingly perfect stories from history, the moment you scratch beneath the surface, you find a world of complexity, debate, and competing claims. Our neat and tidy tale, it turns out, has a few other potential authors. And this is where historians begin to argue, their debates as crisp and salty as the very snack they're discussing. Let's pull back from that single, legendary night at Moon's Lake House and consider another narrative, one that has gained considerable traction among food historians. This version of events introduces a new and vital character into our story, Catherine Adkins Wicks, who was none other than George Crum's own sister, or, as she was known to everyone in the area, Aunt Kate. In this telling of the tale, the invention wasn't a sudden flash of angry inspiration from a male chef, but a simple accident in the hands of a hard-working woman. According to this alternative history, Aunt Kate was also employed at Moon's Lake House, working alongside her brother in that same hot, chaotic kitchen. One day, while preparing potatoes for the evening rush, she was peeling a potato when a thin, wafer-like shaving accidentally fell from her knife into a nearby pot of hot fat that was being used for frying donuts. Before she could fish it out, the thin slice crisped up, turning golden brown. She retrieved the brittle disc with a skimmer, let it cool for a moment, and, driven by curiosity, she tasted it. She found it delicious. Delighted by her accidental discovery, she showed it to her brother, George. Crum, recognizing a good thing when he saw Ita, perhaps tasting its potential to annoy a certain type of customer, decided to experiment further. He refined the process, developing the Saratoga chip as a novelty item for the restaurant. This version of the story first came to wide public attention in the 1970s and 80s, largely promoted by Wicks's own descendants, who wanted to ensure their ancestor received the credit they felt she was due. Wicks herself even claimed to be the true inventor in a 1924 newspaper interview published late in her long life. In it, she recounted the tale of the accidental slice, firmly planting her flag on the invention. This account shifts the emotional core of the story entirely. It transforms it from a tale of masculine ego and creative revenge into one of humble, accidental discovery by a woman whose contributions were later overshadowed by her more famous and flamboyant brother. Given the historical tendency to overlook or erase the contributions of women, especially women of color, from the narrative of invention, this account carries a significant and plausible weight. So, who do we believe, Crum or his sister? The historical record is, unfortunately, frustratingly ambiguous. George Crum never publicly claimed to have invented the chip himself. His fame came from perfecting and popularizing them at his own successful restaurant, which we'll visit later. The Picky Diner story, in its full, dramatic form with Cornelius Vanderbilt as the antagonist, doesn't appear in print until many decades after the fact. In a 1940s ad campaign for the National Potato Chip Institute, this suggests it might be a clever piece of marketing mythology, an origin story crafted to be more memorable than the simple truth. An unverified but persistent local legend in Saratoga claims Crum actively let his sister have the credit, telling people, "Aunt Kate started 'em." Historians are divided. Some argue that the dramatic Crum story, while embellished, is more likely, citing that a professional, famously temperamental chef is a more plausible source for such a deliberately provocative creation. Others argue that the story of Wicks's accidental discovery is far more typical of how new foods are often created through happenstance, not dramatic confrontations. They point to her own public claim as strong evidence. Perhaps the truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in the middle. Maybe Kate Wicks had her accident, and George Crum, seeing the result, was inspired to use it as a weapon in his battle with you, the Picky Diner. It could be that both stories are, in their own way, true. The accidental discovery and the intentional perfection could be two parts of the same invention. For now, the question of who really invented the potato chip remains one of history's more delicious and unresolved little debates. A reminder that behind every simple story, there's often a more complicated and fascinating truth, still waiting to be fully crisped. While we let the historians hash out the specific parentage of your new favorite snack, let's take a moment to appreciate the true, unsung hero of this story, the potato itself. The humble, lumpy tuber that George Crum, perhaps Aunt Kate so brilliantly transformed, had already completed an astonishing, world-changing journey long before it landed on your plate in Saratoga Springs. The very existence of a potato in a New York restaurant in 1853 is a testament to one of the most significant events in human history, the Columbian Exchange. Your story begins not in the warm, humid air of a New York summer, but in the cool, thin, high-altitude air of the Andes Mountains in South America, nearly 10,000 years ago. Long before the rise of the Incas, ancient peoples living in the region of modern-day Peru and Bolivia were the first to domesticate the wild potato. You can picture them, digging in the rocky soil with simple tools, discovering these strange, knobbly growths. They learned that some wild varieties were bitter, even poisonous, a defense mechanism involving compounds called glycoalkaloids. But they also discovered that other varieties, when cooked, were not only edible but nutritious and surprisingly versatile. An entire ancient farming technique involved leaving potatoes out overnight to freeze, then thawing them and trampling on them to squeeze out the bitter juices, creating a freeze-dried, long-lasting food source called chunyo. Remember that little detail? The obsession with removing moisture? It's a theme in the potato's long history. For millennia, the potato remained a well-kept secret of the Americas, the primary food source for vast and sophisticated civilizations like the Inca Empire. To them, the potato wasn't just food, it was a cultural touchstone, with hundreds of different varieties cultivated for different purposes, altitudes, and soil types. They had potatoes that were purple, red, yellow, and blue, potatoes that were long and thin, and potatoes that were round and plump. The potato was the engine of Incan society, a reliable, high-yield crop that could thrive in challenging mountain environments where corn and grain struggled. It fueled armies, fed cities, and was stored in massive state-run warehouses as a hedge against famine. Then, in the 16th century, the world changed. Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Andes, searching for gold and silver. They didn't find as much gold as they hoped, at least not initially, but they found something arguably more valuable in the long run: the potato. At first, they were suspicious of this strange ground apple, or papa, as the Quechua-speaking locals called it. But Spanish sailors, desperate for any food source that would last on the long, brutal sea voyages back to Europe, packed them onto their galleons. A strange, quirky fact is that many European botanists initially classified the potato as a member of the nightshade family, which it is alongside famously toxic plants like mandrake and deadly nightshade. This familial association gave the potato a terrible reputation. It was considered strange, foreign, and probably poisonous. For a long time, many Europeans grew it only as an ornamental plant for its pretty flowers, or fed it to livestock. It took a couple of centuries and a few dedicated champions to convince Europe to eat its potatoes. Perhaps the most famous of these champions was a French agronomist named Antoine-Augustin Parmentier. Parmentier was a prisoner during the 7 Years' War and was forced to eat potatoes as part of his rations in a Prussian prison. To his surprise, he found them not only edible but delicious and sustaining. When he returned to France, he became a tireless evangelist for the tuber, convinced it could solve France's frequent famines. According to a story that sounds remarkably like our Chip Sagar tale of clever marketing, Parmentier hosted lavish dinners for French elites, where every single course was made from potatoes. He even supposedly had his potato patches guarded by soldiers during the day, then removed the guards at night, correctly assuming that the local peasants would believe anything worth guarding was worth stealing. His efforts worked. By the end of the 18th century, the potato had finally been accepted. From Europe, the potato completed its world tour, traveling back across the Atlantic with colonists to North America. It thrived in places like Ireland, where it became so central to the diet that its failure, due to a devastating blight in the 1840s, led to one of the most catastrophic famines in human history. So the potato that you, the picky diner, are eating in 1853 is not just a simple vegetable. It's a world traveler, an agent of history. It is a survivor of conquest, a subject of suspicion, a champion of the poor and the cause of immense tragedy. Its journey from a wild Andean plant to the star of a Gilded Age restaurant menu is a slow, sprawling epic of botany, culture, and human survival. And its journey is not over yet. Its transformation from a simple, thick-cut fry to a delicate, crunchy chip is just the latest, and perhaps most delightfully unexpected, chapter in its long and fascinating biography. Before that fateful, crunchy evening at Moon's Lake House, your potato expectations were shaped by another, already well-established dish, the French fry. The Saratoga chip was a radical departure, a strange and wonderful mutation, but it evolved from an existing culinary tradition. To fully appreciate the delightful shock of the chip, you have to understand the comforting, familiar world of its thicker, softer ancestor. The journey to the French fry is as misty and contested as the origin of the chip itself, a story rooted in the humble kitchens of working-class Europe. Your server called the dish you originally ordered French fried potatoes, a name that was common in America by the mid-19th century. But are they really French? This is a point of surprisingly fierce, and often humorous, nationalistic pride, primarily between France and Belgium. The Belgians, in particular, make a very compelling case. According to their foundational food myth, the story begins in the Meuse Valley, near the city of Namur, in what is now southern Belgium. The inhabitants of this region were particularly fond of eating small fried fish, which they would catch in the river and fry up whole. However, during the harsh winters, the river would often freeze solid, making fishing impossible. Sometime in the late 17th century, so the story goes, an inventive and unnamed Belgian housewife, deprived of her fried fish, had an idea. She took a potato, a vegetable that was by then commonly grown in the region as a staple food, and decided to treat it like a fish. She cut the potato into long, thin, fish-like shapes and deep-fried them in hot fat. The result was a delicious, golden, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside treat that perfectly substituted for her winter fish dinner. Thus, the Belgians argue, the frite was born, not in a Parisian palace, but out of necessity and ingenuity in a humble Belgian home. The term French fries, they contend, is a historical misnomer, likely coined by American soldiers stationed in Belgium during World War I. They encountered the delicious fried potatoes, and because the dominant language in that part of Belgium was French, they mistakenly dubbed them French fries. To this day, in Belgium, fries are a national obsession, served in paper cones from dedicated shops called friteries or frietcots, and accompanied by a bewildering array of delicious mayonnaises. The French, naturally, have their own claim. They point to Paris and the street vendors on the Pont Neuf, the city's oldest bridge, right after the French Revolution in the late 18th century. These vendors, catering to the hungry masses, began selling deep-fried sticks of potato, calling them pommes frites, literally fried apples, a charmingly inaccurate name for potatoes at the time. Evidence suggests these pommes frites were a popular street food in Paris long before they became famous elsewhere, sold in paper twists and eaten on the go. To the French, the fry is an integral part of their bistro culture, the perfect accompaniment to a steak or a bowl of mussels. So was it the Belgians in the 1680s or the French in the 1790s? The debate continues, with both sides passionately defending their claim to the greasy, golden throne. Regardless of who invented them, the man often credited with introducing French fried potatoes to America is none other than Thomas Jefferson. This is another one of those historical facts that is both true and slightly misleading. Jefferson, during his time as American minister to France in the 1780s, did indeed encounter the dish and was quite taken with it. In his handwritten manuscripts, there is a recipe for potatoes fried in the French manner. However, his method described slicing the potatoes into rounds more like what we would call a home fry, or even a thick chip, and then frying them. He famously served them at a White House dinner in 1802, where a guest described them as potatoes served in the French manner at first, but with the skins taken off and the pulp cut in small slices and fried crisp. The crucial element here is that the thick, finger-shaped fry, as we know it, wasn't yet the standard. The form was still fluid. By the time you were dining at Moon's Lake House in 1853, the term French fried potato has come to mean what Chef Crum initially prepared: thick-cut batons of potato, fried until golden. This was the established, comforting, and beloved form. It was a known quantity. It was soft, fluffy, and substantial. The Saratoga chip, by contrast, was its complete opposite. It was thin, brittle, and insubstantial. It had no fluffy interior. It was all exterior, all crunch, all surface area. Crum didn't just modify a recipe, he deconstructed the very idea of a fry. He took the comforting hug of the fright and replaced it with the sharp, exciting slap of the chip. He stripped away the softness and left only the pure, unadulterated essence of crispiness. And that radical departure from the familiar, comforting world of the French fry is precisely what made that first crunch so utterly shocking and so completely revolutionary. The phenomenal success of the Saratoga chip did not just remain a quirky menu item at Moon's Lake House. It became the foundation upon which George Crum built his own legacy. By 1860, after several years of his mistake being the most popular dish at the restaurant, Crum had amassed enough capital and, more importantly, enough of a reputation to strike out on his own. He left Moon's Lake House and opened his own establishment just a short distance down the lake in a place called Malta. He named it simply and proudly Crum's. Crum's was not like the grand, aristocratic hotels of Saratoga Springs. You can imagine it as a much more rustic, independent, and fiercely personal establishment. It was a lakeside cabin, a roadhouse that catered to the wealthy tourists and locals who would travel out from town specifically to dine there. And the main reason they made that journey? To get the authentic, original Saratoga chips from the man who made them famous. Crum's became an institution, a culinary pilgrimage site for the chip-obsessed. His restaurant was one of the first, if not the first, to feature a basket of chips as a standard appetizer on every single table, a practice that would later be emulated by restaurants all across the country. George Crum ran his establishment with the same fiery personality and exacting standards that had led to the chip's invention in the first place. But now, he was the master of his own domain, beholden to no one. And this led to a set of famously eccentric and uncompromising rules for his restaurant. He was, in modern terms, the original soup Nazi, but for potato chips. His restaurant was not a place for the casual or indecisive diner. It was an experience curated entirely by Crum himself. There are countless local stories about his particularity. For one, he was adamant about the quality and freshness of his ingredients. He maintained his own small farm, growing his own vegetables and raising his own pigs and poultry to ensure everything met his standards. His most famous rule, however, was a strict and unyielding policy of exclusion that seems astonishing by today's standards. While Crum himself was a man of color, and his restaurant was one of the most celebrated establishments in the region, he enforced a strict policy against serving parties that were not mixed-race groups if they were not his personal friends. White parties and black parties alike, who were not known to him, were often turned away at the door. Historians still puzzle over this. Was it a strange, misguided attempt to enforce a kind of integrated harmony in his own small world? Was it a business strategy to cultivate an air of extreme exclusivity? Or was it, as some have suggested, a deeply personal and perhaps bitter response to the pervasive racism he faced his entire life, his own way of controlling who entered his space, turning the tables on a society that constantly sought to exclude him? We may never know the precise motivation, but it cemented his reputation as a brilliant but profoundly idiosyncratic restaurateur. For those who were admitted, a meal at Crum's was an unforgettable experience. They would arrive by carriage and be seated at simple, sturdy tables. Immediately, a basket of his famous chips would appear, still warm from the fryer, impossibly crisp and perfectly salted. Then Crum himself, or a server under his strict supervision, would present the day's main courses. There was no written menu. Crum cooked what was fresh and what he felt like cooking. He would often bring out whole roasted ducks, geese, or legs of venison for the table to admire before carving them himself. The food was rustic, hearty, and by all accounts, absolutely delicious. But the chips remained the star. They were the constant, the anchor of the Crum's experience. He never sought to patent or mass-produce his invention. To him, the Saratoga chip was an artisanal product, an experience tied to a specific place, his kitchen. He knew the magic was in the freshness, in eating them moments after they emerged from the hot oil. He sold them in boxes as a takeaway item, famously called Crum's Original Saratoga Chips, allowing wealthy patrons to take a piece of the experience home with them. But he never attempted to industrialize the process. The idea of his delicate, hand-sliced creation sitting in a bag on a store shelf for weeks would have likely horrified him. He continued running Crum's, a celebrated and feared local legend, for nearly 30 years, finally retiring in 1890. He passed away in 1914, at the age of 92, a man who had built a remarkable life and career from a single, grumpy, magnificent moment of culinary inspiration. He left behind a famous name and a local legend, but the global future of his invention would be shaped by others. George Crum's vision for his Saratoga chips was artisanal and fiercely local. He saw them as a restaurant delicacy, not a household commodity. But an invention this compelling, this addictively delicious, could not be contained in a single lakeside restaurant forever. The idea was too good to stay put. While Crum was busy enforcing the eccentric rules of his exclusive eatery, the concept of the potato chip began to leak out into the wider world, first as a recipe, and then as a fledgling commercial product. The first step in this great migration from restaurant to living room was the cookbook. The Saratoga chip was such a sensation that it soon began appearing in published recipe collections. One of the earliest known printed recipes for something resembling a potato chip appeared in a 1858 cookbook called the Buckeye Cookbook. The recipe, titled simply Fried Potatoes, instructs the home cook to slice your potatoes very thin, drop into boiling lard and fry a light brown. Take them out with a skimmer and season with salt and pepper. This was it. The secret was out. Now any ambitious home cook with a steady hand and a pot of hot fat could attempt to replicate the Saratoga Springs experience in their own kitchen. The chips began their quiet infiltration of American homes, one greasy, smoke-filled kitchen at a time. But making potato chips at home is a messy, time-consuming, and slightly hazardous affair. There was a clear market opportunity for someone who could produce and package these chips for sale. The earliest pioneers of the commercial potato chip industry weren't big corporations. They were small-time, local entrepreneurs. One of the first on the scene was a man named William Tappenden from Cleveland, Ohio. In 1895, Tappenden began making potato chips in his own kitchen and selling them to local neighborhood stores. At first, he sold them in bulk out of cracker barrels or glass display cases, and a grocer would scoop them into a simple paper bag for the customer. This was the chip in its most primitive commercial form. You can imagine the shortcomings. The chips on the bottom would get crushed, and everything would go stale relatively quickly from exposure to the air. The challenge wasn't production, it was preservation and packaging. The potato chip is a delicate creature, highly susceptible to its two mortal enemies, moisture and oxygen. A chip left out in the open will quickly lose its signature crunch and become a sad, leathery shadow of its former self. For the chip to truly conquer the world, it needed a suit of armor. That armor arrived in the 1920s, thanks to a remarkable woman named Laura Scudder. Scudder owned a potato chip business in Monterey Park, California. Frustrated with the stale, broken chips produced by the bulk barrel method, she had a simple but revolutionary idea. She instructed her workers to take home sheets of waxed paper and iron them by hand into the shape of a bag. The next day at her factory, these handmade bags would be filled with a single serving of chips, and the top would be ironed shut, sealing the chips inside. This was the birth of the first modern sealed potato chip bag. Laura Scudder's invention changed everything. It kept the chips fresher for longer, protected them from being crushed, and allowed for branding and marketing to be printed directly on the package. One fascinating, quirky detail is that she also pioneered the concept of sell-by dates, printing a date on her bags to assure customers of their freshness. Suddenly, the potato chip was no longer just a local treat. It was a stable, portable, brandable snack, ready for mass distribution. This was the moment the chip was truly unleashed. Factories began to spring up across the country. The era of the small-time kitchen operation gave way to an age of mechanization. New inventions, like the mechanical potato peeler and the automatic slicer, streamlined the process. No longer did you need a grumpy chef with a mandolin. You could now have a chugging, steaming machine that could peel and slice thousands of potatoes an hour. Entrepreneurs like Herman Lay, who started his business as a traveling salesman, selling chips out of the trunk of his car in the American South, began to build snack food empires. Lay's aggressive marketing and development of a vast distribution network helped make potato chips a truly national rather than regional phenomenon. The transition from Crum's kitchen to the supermarket aisle was complete. The chip had been domesticated. It had traded some of its artisanal, fresh from the fryer magic for the convenience of mass production and a long shelf life. It was a trade-off, certainly. A bagged chip could never quite replicate the sublime experience of eating one of Crum's originals, still warm and glistening. But it was this transformation that allowed the grumpy chef's sarcastic invention to eventually reach every corner of the globe, ready to be opened and crunched by millions. The stage was now set for the chip's final evolution, the dawn of flavor. For decades, the potato chip lived in a simple, happy, and very salty world. From George Crum's original creation to the first bag sold by Laura Scudder and Herman Lay, the chip had exactly one flavor profile: potato, oil, and salt. And for a long time, that was more than enough. The sheer novelty of the texture, that magnificent, shattering crunch, was the main event. No one thought it needed anything more. The idea of deliberately adding another flavor to a potato chip would have seemed as strange as adding pepper to ice cream. The chip was perfect as it was, or so it seemed. The great leap forward, the dawn of the age of flavored chips, did not come from America, the chip's birthplace. Instead, it came from across the Atlantic, from a small, innovative Irish company called Tayto. The story of the flavored chip is the story of one man, Joe Spud Murphy, a clever entrepreneur who saw a future for the chip that no one else had imagined. In 1954, Murphy owned a small potato chip company in Dublin. The Irish crisps market, as it was called there, was small and dominated by a few English brands. Murphy was looking for a way to make his product stand out. He realized that the technology of food science, particularly in the realm of powdered flavorings, had advanced significantly after World War II. He had a revolutionary idea. What if he could add flavor directly to the chips themselves? It seems obvious now, but at the time, it was a radical concept. His first experiments were for what would become the two undisputed titans of the chip flavor world: cheese, onion, and salt, vinegar. He developed a method for adding powdered seasoning to the chips during the production process, ensuring each chip received a consistent coating of flavor. When Tayto launched the world's first cheese, onion-flavored crisps, it was a sensation. The Irish public went wild. The concept of a chip that tasted not just of salt, but of something else, something savory and complex like cheese and tangy onion, was completely new and incredibly addictive. Salt, vinegar soon followed, offering a sharp, piquant kick that was a perfect counterpoint to the rich, oily chip. One of the great, and almost certainly mythical, stories about Tayto's early days is that they initially included the flavor sachet separately inside a bag of plain salted crisps, allowing the customer to add their own seasoning. They quickly realized it was much more effective to pre-flavor the crisps at the factory. Tayto's success was immediate and overwhelming. They completely dominated the Irish market, and soon, other companies were scrambling to catch up. The flavor genie was out of the bottle, and it wasn't going back in. The idea crossed the ocean back to America, where chip companies began their own experiments. In the United States, the first widely successful flavored chip was barbecue. The exact origin of the barbecue chip is a bit hazy, with several companies claiming to be the first. However, The credit is often given to Hare's, a Pennsylvania-based company, in the late 1950s. They were one of the first to perfect a smoky, sweet, and tangy paprika-based seasoning that perfectly complemented the salty crunch of the chip. It was a home run. Barbecue chips flew off the shelves. Soon after, another classic flavor was born: sour cream and onion. This offered a creamy, cool, and savory flavor profile that was completely different from the sweet smokiness of barbecue. With the success of these early flavors, the floodgates opened. The 1960s and 70s became a golden age of flavor innovation. Food scientists were tasked with a new and exciting challenge. How many different experiences can we create on the blank canvas of a simple potato chip? They developed flavors that mimicked entire meals, from pizza to cheeseburgers. They explored international cuisines, leading to creations like salt and pepper or chili-flavored chips. The invention of the ridged or crinkle-cut chip was, in part, a flavor-driven innovation. Proponents argued that the ridges and valleys created more surface area, allowing more of the delicious powdered seasoning to cling to each chip. A purely functional design choice to make a stronger chip for dipping also became a flavor delivery system. The salty, simple snack born from George Crum's Fit of Peak had become a platform for endless experimentation. It was no longer just about the crunch. It was about the flavor journey. Would it be the smoky sweetness of barbecue, the tangy sharpness of salt and vinegar, or the creamy coolness of sour cream and onion? The choice was now yours. That single, defiant act in a 19th century kitchen had created an entire industry, a global snacking culture, and a canvas for culinary creativity that continues to evolve to this day. Crum just wanted to make a point to one picky customer. He inadvertently gave the world a food so versatile it could contain multitudes. And so, we arrive back in the present, a world utterly saturated with the legacy of George Crum's grumpy moment. We have journeyed from your single, elegant table on the shores of Saratoga Lake, through the mists of Belgian and French culinary history, across the Andes Mountains, and into the modern, mechanized factories of a global snack empire. The simple, sarcastic dish that was placed before you that evening in 1853 has conquered the planet. It is a story that encapsulates so much about invention, culture, and commerce. A story of how a small, personal act of defiance can have immense, unforeseen, and globe-spanning consequences. Think about the journey of that one potato. It began as a rebellious act of culinary art, a dish designed not to be eaten but to be ridiculed. You, the diner, with your impeccable standards and your quiet complaint, were the unwilling catalyst. Your request for perfection, filtered through the proud, fiery temperament of a brilliant chef, produced something entirely new. It's a perfect microcosm of innovation. So many great inventions are not the result of a calm, linear plan. They are born from mistakes, from accidents, from people trying to solve one problem, and accidentally creating a solution for a problem no one knew they had. No one in 1853 knew they needed a food that was essentially a vehicle for salt and crunch, but the moment they tasted it, they knew they had been waiting for it their entire lives. The legacy of that night is all around us. Walk down the snack aisle of any grocery store in the world, you will see Crum's ghost. The shelves are a library of his descendants, a vibrant, colorful testament to his accidental genius. There are chips that are ridged, kettle-cooked, baked instead of fried, made from sweet potatoes, beets, or lentils. There are flavors you can't even imagine, from wasabi ginger to cappuccino, a flavor that thankfully came and went. A quick academic check shows that market analysts estimate there are now hundreds, if not thousands, of distinct potato chip flavors available globally. Each bag is a quiet echo of that first, defiant crunch at Moon's Lake House. The debate between George Crum and his sister, Aunt Kate Wicks, continues to be a gentle reminder of how history is often written and rewritten. It reminds us to look for the hidden figures, the quiet contributors who may not have the more dramatic story but may hold a more authentic claim to the truth. Whether it was born of anger or by accident, the chip's origin is rooted in the hands-on work of real people in a real kitchen. And Crum's own later life, as the proprietor of his exclusive and idiosyncratic restaurant, is a fascinating story of a man navigating success on his own complex terms. A man who refused to let his famous invention be separated from his personal control. His refusal to commercialize the chip on a mass scale himself shows a certain artistic integrity, a belief that some things are best enjoyed in a specific context. But history, like a hungry diner, has a way of taking what it wants. The chip was too good to be kept a secret. Laura Scudder's wax paper bag was the key that unlocked it from its artisanal cage, and Joe Murphy's flavor dust was what taught it to sing in 1,000 different voices. From that point on, the chip belonged to everyone. So the next time you open a bag of potato chips, take a moment. Listen to that initial, satisfying hiss of air as the seal is broken. Look at the delicate, curled, golden discs inside. And as you take that first, magnificent, shattering bite, spare a thought for the long, strange, and wonderful journey that led to that exact moment. A journey that started with a complaint, was fueled by anger, perfected by science, and spread by commerce. It all began with one picky diner, one grumpy chef, and one plate of potatoes, sliced paper thin as a perfect, salty, and utterly delicious insult. The gentle sounds of the lake have long since faded, replaced by the quiet of your own room. The story of that crunchy, salty accident in Saratoga Springs has come to a close. Imagine George Crum, at the end of that long, transformative night, cleaning his station, the fiery anger, long since cooled, replaced by a deep and perplexing sense of having stumbled into something much bigger than he could have possibly intended. He had tried to serve a plate of scorn, but the world tasted only delight, a happy misunderstanding that would ripple outwards for more than a century and a half. And you, the fussy diner who started it all, you probably slept soundly that night, your dreams filled with the phantom crunch of this strange and wonderful new food, never knowing the true extent of the culinary revolution you had so innocently and so wonderfully set in motion. The world often changes not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, unexpected, and utterly satisfying little crunch. Let that simple truth be the last thought that drifts through your mind as you follow it down, deeper and deeper, into a peaceful and well-deserved sleep. All the details and debates of history can now soften and blur, leaving only the calm and the quiet of the night.